Tonight we begin with a development that U.S. officials, global analysts, and Ukrainian diplomats had feared, questioned, and watched unfold with growing alarm. A diplomatic gambit that unfolded not over weeks of careful negotiation, but in hours. Hours that shifted the balance of a 4-year war. Hours that opened a pathway for Moscow's return to global legitimacy. Hours that put Ukraine's future on a collision course with American diplomacy. What President Trump did this week in Davos crossed a line that European leaders had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, Ukraine did not hesitate. They responded with urgency, with defiance, and with a clear message: this is unacceptable. For weeks now, there had been signals, not from official White House statements, not from formal diplomatic channels, just signals that President Trump was preparing something unprecedented. Trump has been unpredictable, yes, but he has been methodical in his unpredictability. His moves have followed a certain rhythm, a pattern, almost a choreography. But what set off alarm bells in Kiev and Brussels this week was that the pattern went silent. European diplomats who monitor U.S.-Russia relations know the indicators. The sudden pivot toward Putin in public statements. The emphasis on deals over principles. The dismissal of allied concerns as bureaucratic obstacles. The sudden embrace of unconventional diplomatic structures. All of that went quiet. And whenever Trump goes quiet on Russia, it means something big is about to get loud. Early Wednesday morning, officials at the World Economic Forum in Davos detected what they described as a major diplomatic shift, including the formal launch of the Board of Peace that had not been fully explained in over a week. These are the kinds of moves that Trump only deploys when he is signaling something very specific. A reset with adversaries, a bypass of traditional alliances, or a fundamental restructuring of global conflict resolution. European observers didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Trump was changing America's posture. And when American presidents shift diplomatic strategy without full consultation, even by small measures, allies pay attention. Standing at a signing ceremony in Davos, Trump announced that the Board of Peace, originally designed to oversee Gaza reconstruction, would now address global conflicts. He invited 59 world leaders, among them Vladimir Putin. And Putin, in a move that stunned diplomats across Europe, said Russia was prepared to pay the $1 billion membership fee using Russian assets frozen by the Biden administration. The response issued by Ukraine and European allies tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Ukrainian officials, after emergency consultations, described Trump's move as premature, dangerous, and perhaps most importantly, a betrayal of the principles that had sustained Western support for Ukraine since February 2022. But warning only works if the target hesitates. Trump did not. In fact, his embrace of the Board of Peace today was among the most forceful diplomatic pivots we've seen in recent American foreign policy. Here's what we know. Within hours of Trump's announcement in Davos, Putin addressed Russia's Security Council. These weren't ordinary diplomatic remarks. These were strategic signals. Statements that Putin only deploys when he is preparing to claim international legitimacy while continuing military operations in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking to reporters, said it was very difficult to imagine Ukraine and Russia sitting together on the same council. British Foreign Minister Yvette Cooper raised concerns about Putin being part of something discussing peace when we have still not seen any signs from Putin that there will be a commitment to peace. In Ukraine, France, Norway, and Sweden declined invitations. But Hungary's Viktor Orban accepted immediately. Belarus, labeled Europe's last dictator, formalized its participation. And Putin said Russia would pay using the very assets seized as punishment for invading Ukraine. Tonight, sources confirmed that Trump launched the Board of Peace on January 22nd in Davos, including leaders from over 20 nations that had recently been approached for what analysts believe was a fundamental shift in global conflict management. Trump moved before traditional diplomatic channels could coordinate. He invited Israel. He invited Saudi Arabia. He invited Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Qatar, all of whom confirmed their participation in a joint statement. In other words, Trump targeted the Middle East coalition, the diplomatic architecture that would have made his Gaza plan operational. This is what made European officials' warning so urgent. Trump's board wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of move that could reshape global diplomacy if left unchecked. And Putin, understanding that fully, responded with strategic calculation, not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. He didn't reject the invitation. He didn't demand preconditions. He offered $1 billion in frozen Russian assets. He framed it as support for Palestinian reconstruction. And here's where the story becomes even more alarming. Western intelligence officials now believe that Putin's latest move was designed to test the resilience of Western unity after Trump's election victory. Putin wanted to see whether NATO would fracture, but instead the opposite happened. Ukraine didn't stay silent. They issued warnings that were so direct, so forceful, that even Trump had to acknowledge the tension. You don't get Trump's attention on Ukraine easily. But today, Zelensky did. Security analysts speaking with European media under anonymity described Putin's offer as strategic positioning, a way to legitimize Russia's role in post-conflict reconstruction while the war in Ukraine continues. But European allies proved today that they remain both vigilant and united. Their warnings were not only public, they were coordinated so precisely that France, Germany, and Britain issued near-identical statements within hours. That coordination matters because it shows European resolve. It shows that NATO is not simply accepting Trump's unilateral moves. They are resisting. As reports continue coming in throughout the day, we learn more about the scale of Trump's diplomatic offensive. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt carried out coordinated acceptances, forcing regional rivals to respond. Turkey's President Erdogan, who had been hesitant in recent weeks, was formally invited as a founding member. Hungary's Viktor Orbán, operating as Putin's closest ally in the EU, reportedly used his acceptance to signal Moscow's pathway back into European diplomacy. This wasn't just a Gaza reconstruction plan. This wasn't just a Middle East initiative. This was geopolitical restructuring. This was diplomatic realignment. And diplomatic realignment is the one thing Ukraine has struggled to prevent since Trump's inauguration. For every diplomatic advance Ukraine has made in Europe, Trump has countered with something that complicates their strategy. Remember, European leaders thought Trump would maintain sanctions on Russia. They thought he would support Ukraine's territorial integrity. They thought he would stand with NATO allies. But this week, the exact opposite is happening. Trump is inviting Putin to a peace council. Putin is offering seized Russian assets as payment, and Ukraine is left to navigate a diplomatic landscape that has shifted beneath their feet. What makes this moment so critical and so dangerous is that Trump's latest move happened at a time when Zelensky is under enormous domestic pressure. Ukrainian hardliners want no territorial concessions. Ukrainian moderates want security guarantees before any deal. Ukrainian military leaders want continued Western weapons. Ukrainian diplomats want European solidarity. Zelensky is balancing these demands while negotiating with an American president who openly criticizes him. And when leaders in that position face sudden diplomatic shifts, they're not responding from strength. They're responding from pressure. They're responding from vulnerability. Ukraine's official statement, now circulating among European capitals, was designed to signal that Kyiv is not willing to accept Putin's legitimization. Ukrainian officials said plainly that Putin's participation was inconsistent with the principles of accountability and justice. That is diplomatic language for, this is a betrayal of everything we fought for. You don't usually hear that tone from Ukraine about American initiatives unless something fundamental is at stake. Meanwhile, Zelensky addressed Ukrainian citizens in a somber, defiant speech tonight. He said, "It is very difficult to imagine how Ukraine and Russia can sit together on any council while Russian missiles continue to fall on our cities." He said, "We will not accept any framework that grants legitimacy to aggression." And he said, "Our allies must choose between supporting justice or enabling impunity." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a nation that understands just how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Putin's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the Board of Peace offer, Belarus formalized its membership immediately. Hungary's Orbán publicly endorsed Putin's participation. Russian state media increased propaganda targeting Ukraine's negotiating position. All of this happened within the same 48-hour period. When Putin moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Western analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Putin is preparing to consolidate territorial gains in eastern Ukraine. Another is that Putin is attempting to use the Board of Peace as cover for continued military operations. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Putin is attempting to legitimize Russia's position while undermining European unity. But today, European allies took that card off the table. They didn't accept Putin's participation quietly. They didn't ignore Ukraine's objections. They didn't endorse Trump's unilateral diplomacy. They resisted. What we're watching now is a test of Western unity. Putin wants to see if Trump can fracture NATO. Ukraine wants to show that European support remains strong. The United States wants to broker a deal that ends the war, and Europe wants to prevent a settlement that rewards aggression. Tonight we hear from European diplomats who are now coordinating emergency consultations. They say Trump's move was not coordinated with NATO allies. They say Putin's offer is a strategic ploy to reframe frozen assets. And they say Ukraine's decision to publicly resist is likely part of a broader strategy intended to maintain European solidarity. But Ukraine is not backing down. In fact, Ukraine is escalating diplomatically. Their response today, public, coordinated, and uncompromising, sent a message to Putin that Ukraine will not be sidelined. And it sent a message to Trump that unilateral moves will be challenged. As the week goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Trump hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that Ukraine's resistance was timely. It prevented silence from being interpreted as acceptance. It rallied European allies around a common position. And it reminded the world that Ukraine's sovereignty is not negotiable. What happens next will depend on what Trump does in the coming days. If he walks back Putin's role, this moment will be remembered as a diplomatic misstep that was corrected. If he doubles down, European allies have already shown they are prepared to resist. They have shown they are ready to defend the principles that have sustained Western unity. And tonight, for the first time in weeks, Putin appears to be calculating. Moscow is quiet, too quiet. And when Putin is quiet, it means he is assessing. It means he is choosing his next move carefully. Because tonight, Putin learned something he has learned many times before. Ukrainian resistance is stronger than anticipated. European unity is more resilient than expected. And American diplomacy, no matter how bold, cannot erase the reality of a war that continues. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Ukraine will not accept Putin's legitimization. Europe will not remain silent. And the battle for Ukraine's future has entered a new, more dangerous phase. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.